Hello everybody, welcome back to this series on the 7 Hermetic Lots, in which I will be addressing a somewhat controversial issue, I believe, because in some of the reactions of my announcement of this video, I got several questions whether or not I believed that the reversal of lot formula by night is a valid thing to do or not, and I will demonstrate in this video that there are several possibilities of casting doubt on that procedure, because that's the explanation that's usually given, and I'm not quite sure if that's the one that's really correct. So I will show that in this video. Okay, so let's have a look at it. What's the problem with this? Well, if you look at the formula, you get a certain symbolism and a certain template for interpreting these lots, as I have shown in my previous video, so please refer to that if you're not quite following what I'm saying here. So fortune is the ascendant plus the moon minus the sun, and diamond spirit is the ascendant plus the sun minus the moon. And Paul of Alexandria called these two lots fortune, he called the ascendant of Selene the moon, and he called diamond spirit the ascendant of Helios the sun. Now when you reverse this formula, it's quite difficult to understand what is happening here, and I have had a lot of discussion with modern astrologers trying to explain what happens when you reverse the formula, and they were always quite confused by the mathematical procedure of doing that. So let's have a look at what the problem really is here, because every tradition has it that for many parts you have to reverse the lot formulas for day and night charts. But the problem is that if you do that, a large number of parts actually lose their symbolic meaning. As I've said, Paul of Alexandria called the fortune, the lot of fortune, he called the ascendant of the moon. So, and if you follow the reasoning behind how these lots are calculated, you can see why that is, because the moon in this formula locates the lot, so it's sort of the ascendant of the moon. Now if you reverse the formula, then this logic is violated, because the reasoning behind it becomes quite different. You cannot call the reversed formula of fortune by night the ascendant of the moon, simply because it is the sun in this formula that locates the lot, and you cannot say that this is the ascendant of the moon, because now you're calculating the ascendant of the sun. So what happens is that this quite obviously violates the symbolism, and that's why it's quite difficult to try to explain this to modern astrologers who are only used to calculating lots by means of the reversal of the formula by night. So that's an interesting point. So let me show you how we can look at this procedure and try to explain how this happens and what can be said about it. So I'm going to do it in a different and new way. So here we have a day chart, because you see that the sun is above the horizon, and we have to calculate the distance from the sun to the moon. So the procedure is quite simple, and I'm going to show this in a quite simplistic fashion, because I'm simply going to count the signs between these two planets. So you start by counting the distance between the sun and the moon, and in this case that is 9 images, 9 signs, which is quite obvious. Now the next step in this procedure is that you count the numbers that you've just found, these 9 images. You count them from the ascendant in the zodiacal order, and that is counterclockwise, like this. So there you have the second stage of this procedure. So, and then the texts say, and where the number leaves off, that is the place of fortune. So here it is. You see that in this chart, which I have calculated via the software Planet Dance, you can see that the lot of fortune is actually at 12 degrees, the 13th degree of Gemini, the twins. So that is correct. So that is how this is done. But now I'm going to do something different a bit, because I'm using the same formula the formula of fortune, and now I'm going to count the distance between these two planets in the opposite direction in reverse order. So now I'm going to do it clockwise, like this. And when I do that, where that number leaves off, that's the place or the house of the daimon. And when I calculate this by means of the software, you get this calculation that the lot of the daimon spirit is at the first degree of the water pourer. So that's correct. So what's interesting is that this is actually the location of the lot of spirit, but I've calculated it with the same formula, and the only thing that I did differently was to count it in the reverse order. So that's what I did over here. Okay, now we have of course the same chart, and now I'm gonna find the lot of spirit by means of the regular formula, which is the ascendant plus the sun minus the moon, and where that lot arrives, that's the ascendant of the sun, as it's called by Paul of Alexandria. So the procedure is like this. Now you count the number of images between the moon and the sun, because that's what the formula instructs us to do. So that's like this, okay? And that's 5 images in this chart. No problem there, I think. And as per the instructions of this procedure, we now count that same difference that we just located between the moon and the sun, and we now again count it from the ascendant counterclockwise, like so. And indeed the program says that the lot of the daimon is found at the first degree of the water pourer. Okay. So now I'm gonna do the same trick I did in one of the previous slides, and I'm now gonna count the number of images between these two planets in the other direction, in the reverse order. So in this case it's gonna be clockwise, and when I do that I arrive at the location of fortune in this chart, which is the 13th degree of the twins. So here you have sort of an interesting feature of these calculations, because you can use one formula to find both lots, and the difference is the direction in which you count, and that is what is reversed. So that's quite a new slant on this issue of the reversal of the formula. My opinion is that reversal does not have to do with the lots themselves and the reversal of the planets used in them, but it's the reversal in the way in which you count. And we have an author who quite clearly says so. This is a text fragment, a citation from the work of Dorotheus, as translated by David Pringry, but compiled by Deborah Holding, this is what he says on the lot of brothers. If you wish to compute the lot of brothers, count from the degree of Saturn to Jupiter and add it to the degrees of the ascendant by day and subtract it from the ascendant by night. Wherever it comes to, then there is the lot of brothers. So this quite clearly says that you have to count in reverse order, and in this case you do not change the formula of the brothers, the lot of brothers, because it goes from Saturn to Jupiter, both day and night charts. So that's interesting. So the reversal understood this way has to do with the direction in which you count. So, and my main point is that it leaves the symbolism intact. The symbolism is not violated by reversing the planets used, but by reversing the way in which you count, and that leaves the symbolism intact. Okay, so now we have looked at a day chart. Now what about night charts? So let's have a look at that. So here we have a night birth, as you can see, because the sun is under the horizon, under the ascendant-descendant line. And now I'm going to calculate with the formula not reversed, so not the ascendant plus the sun minus the moon. So that is actually the day formula as usually as given for the lot of fortune. And what I got to do now is I count the number again between the sun and the moon, which is 9 images. in this case, and then we're gonna count them, but in another way as normally understood. Okay, so now the next step is again to count the numbers between these two planets, but now we're going to do it in the reverse order, so in the clockwise direction, which is not normally the way we calculate the number of images from the ascendant in the normal day chart, but now we do it counterclockwise, clockwise. So then we get this. And our calculations say that where the number leaves off, that's where we find fortune. So that's an interesting feature of using again the same formula but not reverse the planets, but what you do reverse is the way in which you count the distance between these two planets in images. So I'm going to do another the next step in this calculation. I again use the formula for fortune by day, and I do not reverse it, the formula that is, but now I count the number of images going from the sun to the moon in the zodiacal orders, which is counterclockwise. So that is like this. And again, my calculations in the software says that the lot of the daimon is now found in the 24th degree of the lion. And that's actually the location of the daimon, the spirit. And again, please see that I have used one formula to find both lots in this night chart. So the difference again is the direction in which you count. So that is what is reversed, not the order of the planets. Okay, that's all nice and clean for the formula of the hermetic lots. But what about the other lots? So let's have a look at some of the examples. Let's have a look at the lot of brothers as instructed by Dorotheus. He says, count from the degree from Saturn to Jupiter and add it to the degrees of the ascendant by day and subtract it from the ascendant by night. Now this is a day chart. You have to take my word for that. And what we have to do, again, we count from the degree of Saturn to the degree of Jupiter. When we do that, we see that this is 11 images between both of them. Okay, so the next step will be that we have to do the calculations from the ascendant. So when we do that, we see this. We arrive at the 11th image, which is in this case also the 11th house, and that's what a lot of brothers is. So part of brothers is found at the fourth degree of Aries in this chart, and the ram. Okay, so that's nice and straightforward. So let's do it for a night chart in this case. As it's clearly from how Dorotheus instructs us, this lot does not have to be reversed by day and night, so not the distance from Saturn to Jupiter is reversed. So we can count from Saturn to Jupiter, and if we do that in this chart, sorry, we see 3 images between them, and when we use our calculations by subtracting it from the ascendant, we see that this lot has to be in the sign of the lion. So, and indeed, our calculations from the software says that it is. So that's pretty straightforward. Now let's look at another lot as given by Dorotheus. He says, concerning the lot of the fathers, count from the degree of the sun to the degree in which Saturn is, and by night from Saturn to the sun, and add it to the degrees of the ascendant by day and subtract it from the ascendant by night. So let's have a look at this chart. This is a day chart, as you can see. The sun is above the horizon, so we count from the sun to the degree of Saturn, which is this, which is 5 images between them, and when we calculate the same images from the ascendant, we arrive at the 5th sign, and our calculation says that this is indeed the lot of the father at the 28th degree of the water power in this chart. So pretty straightforward. Let's have a look at the lot of the Father in a night chart, and when we reverse the formula we get the Ascendant plus the Sun minus Saturn. So now we have to count the images between Saturn and the Sun in this chart. So that's like this. There we see that there are 9 images between these two planets, and the instruction says that we subtract it from the Ascendant by night, which is by 30 degrees at a time. So when we do that we get this. So the lot of the Father should be in Pisces. But when we calculate we see that the lot of the Father is not in Pisces but is in the Crab. So what is going on here? Now let's try something else so I can show you how this actually functions. Something strange going on here, so let's try this. We're going to use the day formula in this night chart, which is the Ascendant plus Saturn minus the Sun. So we again calculate the distance between both of them, and you see that this is 5 images between the Sun and Saturn. And when we do the calculations in a night chart, which is to subtract it from the Ascendant, then we get this, and then our calculation is correct. So something is wrong with the way that this is suggested by the way this is described in the formula given by Dorotheus. So we have to change something in that text. So we have to erase what's written there, and we simply have to use the day calculation, and then we have to subtract it. So this quite beautifully underlines what I've been trying to say with this video in general. You count not the distance between other planets, but you use the same day formula, which is symbolic for the particular lot, and you do not reverse the planets that you calculate the distance between them, but what you do is you reverse the order of counting, which is counterclockwise or clockwise. And now I'm going to explain something about that. Why is that so important? So what is that about clockwise and counterclockwise? Why is that so important? Well, for that we have to look at our great philosopher Plato again, who talked about the motion of the same and the motion of the other. And for this I strongly rely on what Robert Schmidt said about this, but it's simply found in Plato, because he said something about the way the heavens move, and that's like this. We have the motion of the same, which is the daily movement of the ecliptic with everything in it and on it. So that's the clockwise direction, and it's called the primary movement. And astrologers know that primary directions are based on this motion of the heavens. The other one is this. The motion of the other is the movement in the ecliptic, the zodiacal movement of planets and all bodies in them. So that's counterclockwise, and that's called the secondary movement. And of course we know that secondary progressions have to do with this movement. So that's quite an interesting fact. So when you put them together you get a very interesting philosophical principle, because you could say that the own zodiacal movement of the planets, the motion of the other, can perhaps be understood as the expression of the free will of the native, because the planets in that movement of the other, the motion of the other, they move by means of their own principles, and you could say that it sort of resists or counteracts what is given by the primary motion of the motion of the same. So that's pretty interesting. But what's very interesting and what's really very important for this astrology is that this secondary motion, the motion of the other, is always subordinate to the motion of the same, because the motion of the same says how it rotates every day. So wherever the planets are and whatever they are doing with each other, and however they are moving in their own secondary movement, their own zodiacal movement, that is always subordinate to the motion of the same, because that's the primary daily motion. And that's very, very interesting, because that has to do with some sort of overruling destiny, a principle of fate. both the planets and the zodiac are subject to it. So whatever the principles of the planets and the zodiacal signs are, the images, they are subordinate to the motion of the same, which carries them around each day within 24 hours and a bit less. And that's the dominant fate concept. And that's the reason these two movements are the archetype of the fate concepts. And they are really the reason why I gave my Dutch book this title, On Moving and Being Moved, because they move by themselves, but they are also being moved. And that's the return of fate in astrology. So that's an interesting principle and really very encompassing for this. So now let's have a look at what this has to do with the calculations of the lot. Now Robert Schmidt did a very extensive workshop on the principle of the same and the other in the philosophy of Plato, and this is some of the things he said in that talk. The same is a bit of sun-like, and the other is like moon-like. That's my interpretation. So it's the daily move, the same principle. The motion of the same is the daily movement of the ecliptic, which has to do with setting limits to things, which is quite easily understood when you think of the planets moving in their own direction and going about their own business. They are limited by doing so by means of this primary motion which carries them around the heavens on a daily basis. So that's sort of a limit to the limitlessness of whatever the counterclockwise secondary movement, the motion of the other, can achieve. And the principle of the same is associated also with the one, which is a very loaded philosophical term, of course, which has to do with unity and uniformness and regularity, because the regularity of this motion is really very stable by day, dawn, noon, evening, midnight. And although the length of each crucial period can differ, because in the winter, of course, the daytime is much more shorter than in the summer, nonetheless it's a very regular movement, as opposed to the motion of the other, which is quite irregular. And it's called the limitless, or the many, the dyad, which is also a pretty loaded term in Platonic philosophy. The manyness, scattered, chaotic. That's very interesting, because that's proved by the fact that the planets in their zodiacal movement have different speeds. They're sometimes invisible because of their proximity to the sun, for instance. They can be retrograde, they can be stationary, they can be direct going. So their movement is quite chaotic in a certain sense. So there's an indeterminacy and a multiplicity. So that's interesting, because these movements have to do with the way in which we count our lots. So let's have a look at that. Now, the principle is that in day charts you always count the number of images from the ascendant in zodiacal order, and that's counterclockwise, which is the motion of the other. Now, why would we do that? Why is that such an interesting feature of how you calculate lots? Well, because of this. This is suggestive of the randomness of the worldly level where these lots have their home. So in that sense, it's sort of it makes sense to calculate in the order of the motion of the other, the movement in the ecliptic, because that's the place where the place of coming to be and passing away actually is, which is the place where these lots have their home, so to speak. So, and this also has something to do with Plato, who said that this worldly level is the place of the errant cause, and the errant way in which the planets move is shown by the motion of the other, the motion in the ecliptic, the movement of the planets there can vary greatly. Their speed differs. They can be walking backward, they can be walking forward, they can be visible, they can be intense because of their nearness or proximity to the sun or their distance from it. So this is really a very interesting philosophical principle as reflected in this principle of moving the lot formula in the zodiacal order, which is counterclockwise. And in night charts, you do the opposite. With the same formulas, please remember you do not reverse the formula, you reverse the direction in which you count. Which is also pretty interesting because in a night chart, which has to do more with the motion of the other, now you count the lot formula in the direction of the motion of the same, which is again sort of counteracting or something. It's very interesting because the principle is that it turns around somehow. That's a very interesting principle of what you do with the lot formula by not reversing the formula, the planets in it, but reversing the manner in which you count these things. So these astrologers are having some fun because this manner of moving things about really has pretty deep philosophical roots. So it's quite interesting to look at it like this, in this way. So again, the motion of the same, the sun-like movement, the daily movement of the ecliptic is clockwise. It goes against the order of planets in the ecliptic, how they are moving, because they are moving counterclockwise. They are moving against the order of the daily motion. So that's the principle behind this. So in a day chart, you count in this direction from the ascendant to find the lots, which is the opposite of the motion of the same, which correlates with the principle of the day. And this is about the calculation of lots in a day chart. So that's an interesting feature. It turns things upside down a bit. And in a night chart, you count in this direction, in the clockwise direction from the ascendant to find the lots. So that is the opposite of the motion of the other, which correlates with the principle of the night. So the reversal is not about the planets that change their place in the formula, but in the direction in which you count. So that's what you see here. Do not reverse the formula, but reverse the direction in which you count, which Dorotheus also said in his definitions of how to calculate some lots. So that's the principle behind this. So to recapitulate, fortune is calculated by using the formula the ascendant plus the moon minus the sun, and that formula does not change in a night chart, it's just counted the other way around. And for Diamond Spirit it's the same. This formula does not change in a night chart. So you can simply keep using the normal formulas given in all sorts of texts, and be careful by how you read the reversal. But I hope I have explained that sufficiently in this video, but I want to give you some sort of relief, because you can still use the reverse formula for your calculations, but you have to remember that that is just a mathematical tool, and that is what became so all important in all the ancient texts, which said you have to reverse the formula by reversing the planets in the formula, which is not quite true, but mathematically that is correct. So don't get me wrong, you can use the formula for your calculations or when you are programming or whatever, but please remember that the symbolism gets violated when you do that. So you don't have to violate the symbolism when you understand the reversal as counting the other way around and not reversing the symbolism of the planets in the set lot. So I hope this is a relief for you. And now I will show you why this is so important for me. Important has to do with the template that I gave in my previous video, which has to do with the issue how you can determine certain significations of the lots by means of the formula as given. So in this example I use the Ascendant plus Mercury minus Jupiter, which is always about Jupiter, the planet that arrives on the Ascendant, which is defined and determined by Mercury principles. So I explained in the previous video that why is this lot significant for children, especially for boys. Jupiter as defined and determined by Mercury, because we are determining something about Jupiter, which is the planet of childbirth, which is the planet moved to the Ascendant, and it's defined by Mercury, the planet indicating the location of the lot, which is boys. So you could say that it's about happiness as a consequence, or defined by boys, or in this case your luck, your happiness, your joy by with your male children. And this the other Hellenistic significations of this lot is children in general, again boys, friends, and inheritance. That later one I'm not quite sure, but I think it might have to do with Mercury being the ruler of contracts, and of course a testament and getting an inheritance is also something that is managed and described in documents. So I think the reason is that Jupiter, which also has to do with monetary wealth, is in this case the indicator of inheritance. So that there's a logic there. And my point is that this logic cannot be reversed by saying when I change the order in which these planets are used in a formula by night, then you get a different signification or the same signification, because I have said that my principle, this template, is now different, because when I reverse the formula and I say the Ascendant plus Jupiter minus Mercury, I am not talking about Jupiter as defined by Mercury, but it's the other way around. I'm talking about Mercury as defined and determined by Jupiter. And the significations of this lot are not the reverse as to the logic of the lot of children, which I've described in the box above here. So, well, what do the Hellenistic sources give for this lot? Community, society, partnership, okay, possessions, that's something to do with Mercury again, and Jupiter, simply because Jupiter has to do with wealth and all sorts of financial or material gain. And it's again about siblings, number of siblings, but siblings now in general and not your own personal children, which is something different. So that's the reason why I'm quite adamant about this principle of not reversing the planets in the formula, but reversing the way we count these distances between these two planets. I hope I've made that clear. So I hope I have presented some sort of a logic for why we should not reverse the symbolism. And I know there's a lot of talk and a lot of suggestions that the reversal of the formula has to do with placing a night planet belonging to the night sect on as planet C, the one from which you start counting, and then you count to the other planet, which is very often a day planet, not always, but many times. And that's of course a very interesting rationalization of the reversal of the planets in this formula, but then you really screw up the signification, is in my humble opinion. So thank you everybody for listening to this talk, to this perhaps a sermon. I hope you're not offended by it, and I hope you will keep looking at my videos, because in the next one I will address this issue. The fact that Vejas Valens and Firmicus Maternus both have a lot calculated with fortune and the daimon, and they call it errors and necessity, but they calculate them in the reverse order. So one has the Ascendant plus fortune minus spirit and calls that errors or necessity, and the other one has it the other way around. So why is this important? Because this lot is called basis by Valens, and Rhetorius calls it the foundation of fortune. And as Hellenistic astrology has a lot to do with fate principles, fortune principles. The calling basis the foundation of fortune is a very important factor, trying to understand what it's about. So what is the meaning of these two lots? What is eros and necessity understood in this way? Because we also have a lot of eros, which is the ascendant plus Venus minus the daimon, but this is another one. So that's important. We have a double signification. They are both called eros, and there's both two lots that are called necessity. So what's going on here? And the other question is, where do they fit in this scheme that I've shown here on the slide? And I hope you will join me in the research on what this is all about and how we can use it in our natal charts and what they do signify. So thanks again for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel, where I will be publishing more videos on this interesting topic, and give it a thumbs up if you like it. Thank you, and see you next time.